Welcome to making a protogen from scratch, all put in one video. Over 3 hours of fursuit making guides put in one place. This is because a new project is soon upon us. This video shows the full protogen build, starting from the very beginning and ending with the final result. I had so much fun making this series and building this protogen, and I hope you enjoy seeing it all come together. Thank you, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I really do appreciate it. In general, I've always liked building costumes, and over the years I've built some cool ones. But something that I've always wanted to do is build my very own protogen fursuit from scratch. Hi, I'm Waffles, and building a protogen sounds really difficult, but in theory should be possible. Now, there's some incredibly cool protogen fursuits out there, but honestly, I don't really care about any of those. Instead, I just want to see what the coolest protogen fursuit is that we can build together. All we need to do is get some plastic for the head, some fur for the body, and some electronics for the brain. But there's only one problem. I've never built a protogen fursuit before, and I'm not even quite sure what the best way to do it is. But anyways, to get started, the first thing that we need to do is create the head for our protogen. We're going to use a head-based kit that once assembled will act as the foundation for our fursuit head. We're using a 3D printed kit by Kyborg Studios, and these parts come raw from the printers. Our first real task is going to be cleaning them up and getting them ready to put together. Starting things off, we can go ahead and remove the extra scaffolding material used during the printing process that we no longer use. This material is just used to support the piece as it's printed, and it just isn't needed anymore. Next, we can go ahead and test fit our pieces together to get a better idea of what we're working with. I find adding arrows to my parts makes it a lot easier to keep track of things as we go ahead and assemble it all together. The goal right now is to clean up and smooth out our plastic pieces, making sure that they fit together flush. The more sanding we can do now, the easier things will be when we put it all together. The way this kit works is that each piece is glued together using metal connecting pins. But before we can add our pins, we first need to drill out the plastic holes that they will go in. So now that we've got everything sanded down and drilled out, we can talk about finally starting to put together these pieces. And with that, we've come across our first problem. The instructions say that we should put pins in all of these holes here and then just kind of slot it together. But as you can see, this is basically impossible. The first two holes are kind of aligned, but the rest of them get out of sync really quickly, and it's just not gonna happen. But nonetheless, we still have a strategy, and I think that's just called gluing the absolute crap out of it. So let's go ahead, tack these guys together with some super glue, and then from there, we kind of reevaluate making it stronger and hopefully just kind of getting everything fit together. After trying several different brands of glue, I eventually settled on a brand called Starbond. It's insanely strong. Now, using this new glue, we can go ahead and attach the first two pieces of our head together. It's important to go slow and make sure everything's aligned correctly before the glue dries, because these first two pieces are going to act as the foundation of our fursuit head. After the glue is dried, we once again go ahead and give everything a good sanding down. Remember, we want these pieces to go together as flush and as smooth as possible, so spending this a little bit extra time sanding is going to make all the difference. Now, we can focus on attaching the next piece of the head by drilling out the remaining holes that we need for the pins. Luckily for us, the remaining parts did have all of their holes aligned, and it was a lot easier to put together. In order to attach each piece, we first needed to drill out the pilot holes, sand everything down, and then finally pin it in place. I found it a lot easier to go one piece at a time and only gluing in a few pegs at once. The most important part here is to go slow and make sure everything is aligned flush before letting the glue dry. Now that we've gotten the head glued together, we can go ahead and attach the jaw. Adding it now will really help lock down the geometry of the head. Next, we can add one of my favorite pieces, and that's the little wings on the side of the head. They're one of my favorite parts to add because they just click right on and they start to make our head really look like a protogen. Now that we have our kit assembled, we can go ahead and give everything a generous second coat of glue. At this point, the head is really starting to feel sturdy. For the most part, everything went together smooth, but there are still a few places where things could be improved. So, as you suspect, another round of sanding is required. It just ends up making the final product look so much better, and it's good for the soul. You can see the difference between the two pieces before and after, and it really does make a difference. spending a little bit extra time on these little details adds up in the long run and makes your final product look a lot better. The next thing that we need to do to finish is to cut out the holes on the side of the head. Eventually, they'll be replaced with clear plastic with LED lighting behind them. Sometimes in life, you need a messy solution to solve a problem. Here, the plastic is soft, so I'm using a grinding drill bit to chew through the plastic to create a hole. There's almost certainly a more elegant solution out there, but when all you have is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. Once the majority of the material is removed, we can go ahead and use sandpaper and files to clean up the edges of our holes. Now that we've finished all the cutting and gluing and sanding for now, we can go ahead and give everything a good coat of primer. If you've ever painted on plastic before, you'll know just how notoriously difficult it is to paint. Using a good primer is a requirement if you want things to look good later down the road. Primer also makes it a lot easier to spot mistakes you've made anywhere on the sanding from before. Ooh, check it out, YouTube chat. I'm pretty satisfied with how this is turning out, and you can see it's looking a lot better now that it's primed. Now, there are a few more things that I want to get done before we can call this head frame complete, and the first thing is fixing these lines here. I thought we could just sand it out and it would look nice and flush, but I'm not satisfied with that and I still think it looks kind of goofy. I'm going to go ahead and use Bondo, which I've never used before, to fill in all of these gaps. I might even put a little bit up here too, but that should give us a nice smooth helmet to make this thing feel like one unified piece as opposed to a bunch of random pieces stuck together with some glue. So with all that work done, we can officially call the frame for our protogen head done. I know a lot of work went into it, but this piece is going to act as the frame or base work for everything else going forward, and I really wanted to spend some time on it. If you're interested in seeing the rest of this fursuit be finished, go ahead and hit subscribe. It's really fun to go on an adventure together where we kind of build a fursuit from scratch, and I can't wait to see kind of the next couple steps for this protogen head. And if you're interested in fursuit making, there is a Telegram group chat that has some really cool people in it and some great information that you can join in the link below too. Thank you, and I can't wait to see you guys again soon. Coming up on building a protogen from scratch, we attempt brain surgery, struggle to fold some cardboard into origami, and put on a cool pair of glasses. Hi, I'm Waffles, and in the previous episode we went ahead and put together all of the pieces for our head. Our goal this episode is to add some ears, paint the frame, and attach the visor. So with all that being said, let's go ahead and pick up right where we left off. The first thing that we need to do is line the inside of our head with foam. This will allow us to place it on our mannequin, making it a lot easier to work with. We are using 1-inch thick upholstery foam and just kind of eyeballing all the measurements. Because eventually this will be covered with Lycra, it really doesn't matter about these being perfect. Once we get all the major pieces in place, we can start working on the ears. It's important to test fit as we go along because we want to make sure this is comfortable to wear for long periods of time. I make sure to cut out the excess material on the inside of the ears so that you can still hear what's going on around you outside of the head. Finally, we add a small strip that rests on your forehead to stop everything from rattling around. I always feel like ears are one of the hardest parts of a fursuit to make right. They're quite fiddly and they never look right. Now, we do have a trick up our sleeves. We're going to use CAD to create our ears, also known as cardboard aided design. The first step is to figure out the shapes that we're going to use to make our ears. It took several prototypes to get the shapes that I wanted, so don't be shy about throwing them out and starting over. I found that looking at your cardboard templates from as many different angles as you can helps give you the best perspective in order to make them look good. Next, we can cut out small accent pieces to help represent the curvature of the ears. They definitely help make the ears pop too. Now, the very last piece we're going to add to our ear template is this little guy right here, and YouTube chat, I'm holding out on you. I have a secret. So with building this head, I've been really worried about heat, especially with the electronics inside and just how heavy this guy is. He's gonna get really hot really quickly, and I think I have a solution to that. We're gonna go ahead and try to sneak fans inside each of these ears. Over the years, I've had many different people ask me, why can't you put a fan inside the ear to cool down the head? And the answer is, I don't know. Me building this protogen, I really wanted to go ahead and play around with electronics more and get better at that. And what a better way to do that is to try to add fans inside our ears. The next thing that we're gonna do is, we need to figure out how big our fan's gonna be and cut out the holes for where they're gonna go. One of the reasons why these videos take so long to make is that I'm constantly waiting on parts to ship. In this case, I know that the fan we're going to use is going to be 50mm square, so I'm using a postage note cut to size as a template. Finally, once everything is triple checked for measurements, we can go ahead and break out the power tools. The holes we added into the top of their head for our fans are looking really good, but good. Now, I know I haven't talked a lot about this character or his design, but it's because I'm just kind of winging this whole project. This protogen is to have fun, and I'm excited building it, so that's why I decided at the very last second to add this teal stripe on our visor. I think it looks really cool, and I can't wait to see how it looks with the fur on and then also the visor in place. Now, if you remember, at the very beginning of this episode, the goal was to add our ears to our fursuit head. The reason why we couldn't originally is because we needed to cut this hole. So with the hole cut and everything painted, we can go back to starting to talk about the ventilation for our fursuit head. Okay, here's the plan. So I have these little fins that fit perfectly into the holes we drilled earlier. The next step is that I want to add some sort of a grill material to the inside. This is just like plastic mesh. I think technically it's used to like separate fish, but whatever, it'll get the job done perfectly. All we need to do is cut out some squares of it and then fit it on the inside of the head. Not only is that going to stop things from getting caught in the fans, it should also help center them and hold them in place while we add the larger ear foam on top of that. Finally, we can return back to our original plan of making the ears. To start things off, let's go ahead and cut out the templates we created earlier. For the base, we're using EVA foam, and I find that it's a lot more stiff than upholstery foam. I think in total I made 4 separate pairs of ears, but I do think the final version looks the best. Protogens remind me of circles with their sharp edges and hard angles, so I wanted to capture that with more pointed ears. Next, we can go ahead and add the edge pieces to our ears. I find that this is the point where they start to feel like ears instead of just giant foam triangles. Now that we have all of our major pieces in place, we can go ahead and glue in our fans. To power this monstrosity, we have two 50mm computer fans with Molex connectors that will convert over to USB. These should hopefully provide us with some serious airflow while still being relatively quiet. Once everything is glued in place, we can go ahead and attach the top grill. This should prevent anything from getting caught inside of our fans. Next, we can hide our fans by attaching another piece of foam to it and the outer ears. This should shroud it in place. Finally, we can add a few small detail pieces and just generally shape and trim the foam. This ends up making it look really polished and a lot more professional. Now, I don't know about you, YouTube chat, but I'm really happy with how these turned out. It took several attempts overall, but I think the final effect is really good. Our next goal is to attach one of the most iconic pieces to the head, and that's the visor. This one comes from the Kyborg Studios parts kit we put together last episode. If you've ever wondered how they make these, you can use a vacuum former to stretch a very hot sheet of plastic over a template. Then, you can submerge your plastic in boiling hot dye to give it the distinct opaque look. What I'm doing here is very carefully cutting it out using tin snips. It's important to go slow because any mistakes here will be a huge pain in the butt to fix. Speaking of mistakes that are a pain in the butt to fix, after cutting out the visor, I realized that it was about ½ inch too short. Frustratingly, I followed the lines that came pre-scored into the visor from the maker, and they ended up being a lot shorter than expected. With problems like this, there aren't any real easy solutions. Instead, you just need to do the best of the worst. To fix it, I ended up shaving down to the front of the frame until the visor did fit. It's slow, delicate work that ends up being a huge pain in the butt, but it guarantees that the visor will fix, assuming we get it all lined up correctly. Attaching this visor has been a lot harder than expected, but nonetheless, I went ahead and sanded down the front of this a lot shorter. It looks just a hair goofy now, but it allows us to attach the visor with it fitting pretty darn good. It's not perfect and there's a little bit of a gap, but it's like 95% of the way there. Now, the next thing that we need to do is attach this visor to the head. I've seen a lot of other protogens use magnets before as a way to like snap it on and off, and I think that's a really cool effect, so that's what we're gonna do here too. So here's the plan on how we're gonna attach magnets to the head so that we can just snap the visor on and off. The first thing that we're gonna do is take this little plastic from before and super glue it into all the corners of the visor, like one up top and at the bottom in the corners. Then we can take our neodymium magnets and then just glue them right in. That'll give us magnets all on the inside. There we can put the visor on, mark where all of the new magnets are gonna go, and then just glue them on the inside. Hopefully it won't be too hard, but the first thing that we need to do is glue in all of our little corner pieces. I don't know about you, but I think that's looking really good. In order to protect our new magnetic friends, we're gonna add a felt liner to cover the edge of our visor. Not only will this protect the magnets from shattering when they come together, it'll also help the visor from moving around on the head. Then we can use a hot glue gun to attach the felt to our visor. You need to make sure not to melt the visor's plastic with the hot glue gun because it gets super hot and that plastic will melt. I don't know about you, YouTube chat, but that's damn satisfying. I'm really happy with how this protogen is turning out and the progress we made this episode. The visor ended up being a lot harder than I expected to make, but in the end, we still got it to look pretty good. Now, there are still a few things I would change, such as I think adding a piece of felt right here beneath the visor would look really good, and our visor is quite a bit shorter than I would like. Now, the only way to fix that problem is to buy another one and redo this whole process, so that's completely out of the question. Always remember, perfect is the enemy of done, and this is looking pretty darn good. Now, in the next episode, I want to start talking about the electronics and building out the face for our protogen. I personally have never done any sort of circuit building or soldering or anything like that, so I'm really excited to learn some new skills. Also, if you've made it to the end of a Fursuit from Scratch video, you either like building fursuits or you're interested in fursuiting in general. So, if these videos have provided you any value, please go ahead and hit the like button. It's something that's free that you can do to help support this channel, and also check if you're subscribed too. With all that being said, thank you guys again so much, and I can't wait to see you guys again soon. About a year ago, we decided to build our very own protogen fursuit from scratch. But there was a problem. I had never built a protogen before, and I don't really quite know what I'm doing. Hi, my name is Waffles, and in the last episode we went ahead and finished the visor, and in this episode we're going to go ahead and tackle the electronics. There is a problem, however. The original electronics designed for this head won't work at all, so we're going to have to build and design something totally new. This is something I've been most excited about since the beginning of this project, and in theory it should make our protogen look really cool. At its core, a protogen's face is two parts. The physical hardware, the screen, the wires, the computer running it, and then the software running on top of all of that. The plan is we're going to get some LED matrices and then somehow hook them up to a Raspberry Pi. Then all we need to do is find some code out there to display a face on our display. But before we can do that, we first need to knock out a few loose ends. The first small task we're going to knock out is adjusting some of the foam we added in the previous episode. In order to make sure the fur looks good, we need to make sure that the transition between the neck and the foam is smooth. Adding a little bit extra foam here will help make sure things look nice and smooth when we inevitably add the fur on top. Next, I did some slight tweaks to where the visor attaches to the head. We have the problem where there's a little bit of a gap between it and the head, so I've gone ahead and glued a strip of felt to help remove any gaps. Also, this helps remove any vibrations and in general just makes it fit a lot more snug. The first bit of electronics we're going to add is another fan mounted on the inside of the chin. This fan has a 90-degree bend in it, meaning that it's going to suck up air from the bottom and then blow it towards your face. After a few slight modifications and adjustments, we can go ahead and glue it inside of the head. This should help create some good cross airflow between the fans we've already added and keep both you and the electronics cool. When learning a new skill, there are no magic tricks to getting good. Oftentimes, the best way to learn is just to dive in and soak it all up. We're standing on the shoulders of giants. There are so many great tutorials out there and a ton of great examples online. Hopefully, if you want to build your own protogen, this will be another good example that you can use to build something cool. In order to give our protogen a brain, we're going to start with a Raspberry Pi. A Raspberry Pi, for those who don't know, is a tiny, powerful computer that works just like a laptop or desktop, except it's really tiny. Using a laptop just to run some LEDs might sound like it's overkill, and honestly it kind of is, but it makes the software side of things a lot easier. There are a ton of different LED displays out there. For our head, we're going to use these Adafruit LED matrices. These displays pack a ton of LEDs into a small area, can change any color, and support dynamic updating. More importantly, they can easily be hooked up to our Raspberry Pi using a connector. The plan is, we're going to use this controller board that should allow our Pi to talk to these matrices displays. The first thing that we're going to build is the power supply. This will give us 5-volt power from the wall and make testing everything a lot easier. To start out, we're going to go ahead and strip the power cable that came with the display board. Then we're going to go ahead and plug that into a female DC power adapter, making sure that the red cable is plugged into the positive terminal. Eventually, we'll still need to figure out how to attach batteries to all of this, but for now, this whole system will work great. Now we can go ahead and start connecting everything together, starting with the power supply cable we just made. Next, we're going to need to send data to our displays using these chunky ribbon cables that connect them to the Pi. The ribbon cables are connected into a part called the bonnet, which is pressed into the Pi just like a giant Lego block. Remember, the Pi is just a tiny computer, so we're going to need to connect a keyboard, mouse, and monitor to see what it's actually doing. Finally, we can go ahead and give our tiny computer friend some power. After an afternoon of troubleshooting and putting everything together, we can finally say that our Raspberry Pi is working and hooked up. For right now, I just have it running the default Pi OS, but that's going to be more than powerful enough for what we need. It's hooked up to the internet, and the only thing we have to do left now is install the software that's going to run on a protogen. If you've never used Linux before, just think of it as the Dark Souls of computers. In order for our displays to actually do anything, we're going to go ahead and use a program called RPI, RGB LED Matrix. It's a mouthful. Our first task is to go ahead and install the software and get it working using a test image. Next, inside of our terminal, we're first going to go ahead and create a new folder and then navigate into it. Then we can use Git to clone the RPI RGB files onto our computer. If you've never used the terminal before, you end up feeling like a cool hacker man when all you're really doing is creating folders and downloading files. Next, we can go ahead and navigate inside of the code we just downloaded and then compile it using the make command. The only code we're really focused on here is the LED image viewer code inside of the utilities folder. I'm also including a guide by Raspberry Valley that I used to help us getting the software working, and it's really helpful. Now, running the code can theoretically render any image to the screens. Now comes to the fun part. Our pile of electronics can display any image we send it, so the next step is to simply draw out a protogen's face and then upload it to our program. The first few attempts didn't go quite perfectly, but after an afternoon of playing around with the settings, we finally got something that looked pretty good. Woohoo! Now, the only thing we have left to do here is to hook up the second display, and then we should be all done. These matrix displays support chaining right out of the box, so the only thing we need to do is plug them in and give them power. I duplicated and flipped over our face image to get a mirrored copy of it and then uploaded that to our Raspberry Pi. Ooh, YouTube chat, what do you think of the face we've given our protogen? Now, this isn't the final version or anything, but I think it serves as a pretty cool proof example of what we can do. I'm really happy with how it's turning out, even if it was kind of a huge pain in the butt to make. There are still a ton of tweaks and edits and changes I want to make down the road. For example, one small thing that I kind of want to change is that right now these are just rendering a photo, but it should be fairly easy to make them render a video instead. That means we could do something like blinking animations or have the face move. There are a ton of different cool possibilities for the future. Now, there is one small problem. The original visor that came with this head a long time ago isn't going to work. It was made for like a completely different system with different screens and wires, and we're going to have to replace it if we want our system to work at all. The next major thing that we need to do in order to finish our protogen is to figure out how in the world we're going to mount these screens inside our head. So I've been doing some thinking on how we're going to solve the problem of mounting our displays, and I think I've come up with a pretty good solution. The first thing that I did was create a cardboard template, and I did this just to kind of rough out our shapes and to make sure that everything was going to fit ahead of time. Now, it sucks that we have to completely remake this visor piece from scratch, but one good thing is that the notches, if you can kind of see them here, we can reuse to mount our visor. Now, it's not perfect, but as you see, it gives us two pretty good points of contact that we can use to mount our screen. The only thing we need to do now is figure out how we're going to mount this on the bottom and get it all glued in place. So the next thing that we're going to do is come up with some cardboard template pieces to figure out what this is going to look like and then glue it all together. Whenever I need to make something and I don't know how, I start by making a cardboard template. You can use it to get a good general idea of what the shapes are going to be before moving on to your more expensive materials. A handy trick is to use a cardboard jig to glue the plastic onto the displays. This prevents the hot glue from getting on the front of the screens and helps to make sure everything is nice and even. Making sure things are symmetrical when it's glued into the head is incredibly important. If they're off-center even by a little bit, people will notice and there won't be any real way to fix it. Finally, we can go ahead and glue everything in, making sure to go slow and waiting for each layer to dry before moving on. Last, all we need to do is hook all the electronics back up and then turn it back on. fun fact, most people don't know this. When it comes to protogen suits, you actually look through the top section up here. And what I mean by that is, if you remove the visor, because the screens block so much of your vision, you actually see through this top triangle piece up here. It's one of the reasons why protogens have this like angled head down look, is because they look through this top section. Most people don't know that. It's a cool little fun fact, but I thought I'd at least point it out to you. So now that we've gotten our displays finished, I think we're at a really good stopping point for this episode. Now, don't get me wrong, we still have a ton of work to do. Next episode, I want to focus on attaching this circle piece, doing the wire management, and figuring out where in the world we're going to put our Raspberry Pi. Because right now, there's not a lot of room in the episodes, so that's going to be a pretty big challenge that we're going to have to overcome. Also, I have a question for you, YouTube chat. What in the world are we going to call this protogen? I don't have a good name picked out, and I figured if you've made it to the very end of this video, you probably care a lot more than the average person, so go ahead and put your suggestions in the comment section below. Also, while you're down there, go ahead and give this video a like, and check if you're subscribed. Liking this video is something that's free that you can do to help show your support, and it helps me out immensely when it comes to finishing this project. So with all that being said, I appreciate you guys' support so much, and I can't wait to see you guys again next episode. Coming up on building a protogen from scratch, tonight we cut some LEDs in half, glue our hands to some plastic, and attempt to untangle some spaghetti. Hi, I'm Waffles, and in this episode of building our own protogen, we're going ahead and wiring up all of the electronics together. In the previous episode, we went ahead and set up the computers needed to display the face, and in this episode, we wire it all together and somehow fit it in the head. Our goals this episode are to attach some LEDs, finish the side panels, and then get it all wired up. The problem is that we have all these random electronics, and somehow we need to hook them all together and then fit them inside the head. To solve this, we are going to first mount the computer inside of the head, then hook up the LEDs to power the cheeks, next wire all our fans together, and last hook up everything to a battery. There's only one problem though. I don't know about you, I've never soldered anything before, and we're going to have to learn from scratch. If you've ever wanted to build your own fursuit, or if you just want to see this fursuit finished, go ahead and check if you're subscribed. Even just liking this video is a great way to show your support, and it's your support that helps get this protogen finished. Now, let's go ahead and get started. The first thing that we need to knock out is mounting a computer inside of our head. In the last episode, we put together this monstrosity, a Raspberry Pi running Linux used to power the displays, and the original plan was to somehow cram that inside of our head. The problem was that it was just slightly too large, so to solve this, I went ahead and purchased a much smaller Raspberry Pi. This computer is about half the size of our original Model B and about 4 times as slow. Now, we don't really care about the performance, as the only thing that it affects is our boot time. The only real downside though is that we need to manually solder on the GPIO headers. Attaching this header allows us to reconnect our matrix driver board that powers the displays. This was some of the first soldering I did this project, and honestly ended up being the hardest. There are 2 rows of 10 pins each that all need to be soldered together while carefully making sure that they only touch 1 pin at a time. I ended up having to reflow these connections several times to fix bugs, but in the end it wasn't too bad. Sometimes, when learning a new skill, I like to try and tackle the hardest part first because I know if I get that done, the rest should be easier. We also soldered a jumper cable on the display board that should stop the screens from flickering. You can still occasionally see them flicker on camera, but this isn't noticeable to the human eye. Instead, this is just an issue with the display's refresh rate matching up with the camera shutter speed. Now that we've rebuilt our computer, we can go ahead and give it a base plate. For this part, we're using the same plastic mesh we used to attach the displays. I'm a big fan of working with this material because it's easy to cut with scissors and doesn't block off any airflow. So now that we have a new brain for protogen, the next step that we need to do is figure out how in the world we're going to mount it inside this head. And if you haven't figured it out already, the plan is we're going to somehow sneak it inside this little pocket right here. The first step to getting that done is we're going to cut out a oval backing piece using this plastic here, and then glue that on the inside. Then we can use a whole bunch of magnets to hopefully just stick it right in, and that should mount our computer on the inside of the head. So I've gone ahead and glued in our base plate here. I did make one small mistake though, and that was not cutting holes for all the wiring, so I'll have to do that off camera. But the next thing that we're gonna need to do is to mount our little computer. The way we're gonna do that is we're just gonna super glue the bottom of it, attaching the magnets to the inside of this. And that hopefully should make this a really good little mounting point so that we can take this in and out whenever we want and have plenty of room for all the wiring. Now we can go ahead and start the process of routing all the cabling inside the head. We're beginning with the power cable for the displays because before it was plugged directly into the wall. Now these cables will run behind the screens, through the cheeks, and then out the back. The general plan is to connect up everything nice and neat and then have all the power cables terminate at the back of the head. A skill that separates the amateurs from the pros is clean cable management. Sure, anyone can just kick all the cables under their desks, but it takes a true artisan to make all that spaghetti look good. So now that we've gotten the basic wiring done, we can go ahead and talk about solving the next problem, and that's adding the LED lighting for each of the little side panels here. The way we're gonna do it is kinda scuffed and kinda gross, but it should totally work. I went on Amazon and I bought some really cheap USB LEDs. People use these for like gaming computers or like TV setups or whatever. But what we're gonna do here is hopefully cut them in half, put a little strip on the inside here, put a little strip on this side, and then just connect them to the Raspberry Pi's built-in USB plug. Hopefully it all should work perfectly fine. The only hard part is going to be cutting this guy in half, having two little LED sections on each side. So let's go ahead and get started and start with the basic wiring. Now, the first thing that we're going to do is run the power cable for the LED lights. This is going to connect our light strip to the PC's USB port to the other side of the head. After verifying that they still work, we can go ahead and cut the lights in half. This will give us two sections of lights, one for each half of the head. Now, all we need to do is solder the two halves together, leaving us a gap in the wire with no lights on it that will run behind the displays. So now that we've gotten these wires soldered together, we can hopefully test them out. So let's turn on our battery here. And wow. I don't know about you, YouTube chat, I am shocked that worked first try. There's one small problem though. I forgot to add I think it's called the heat shield or the heat shrinks. So we're probably gonna have to split these guys apart and slip those over and then just shrink them on. But I'm shocked this works. It looks very sketchy and kind of goofed, but now we can go ahead and pack them in our little earpieces here. If you've never soldered before, it's surprisingly fun and easy. To start, all you need to do is strip the ends of your wires using a tool called a wire stripper. Then you can take the two metal ends and twist them together, making sure to put your heat tubing on first. Next, using your solder gun, you want to make sure to heat the wire from the bottom and melt your solder from the top because it'll cause the solder to flow through the wire, giving you a much better connection. Once you've tested everything, go ahead and slide the heat tube over the exposed metal and give it a little fire to seal everything shut. To attach our LED strips, I simply hot glued them to the inside edge of the cheeks. Not only does this help hide the wiring, it also gives us a pretty cool lighting effect too. So now that we've gotten our LEDs mounted, we can talk a little bit more about how they work. This is just a cheapo set and they come with this basic remote and this controls like color and if they flash or not, basic stuff like that. One small mistake I made when buying these LEDs, so this remote is just ever too slightly big to fit inside this hole. So we're gonna have to use our new electronics abilities to rip this thing apart and make it a lot smaller and somehow fit it in here. Then, once we get that done, we can finally start talking about the cover pieces that's gonna cover this whole mess. Man, this remote ended up being real ugly, but it has everything that we need on it and is small enough that we can easily fit it inside the head. It has full RGB support, it's wireless, and has an over-engineered magnetic mount just like everything else. So YouTube chat, if you ever want to know why these videos take so long to make, let me give you a good example. I'm currently doing the wiring for the fans that sit inside of the ears here. I went ahead, tested both of them, then stripped off the ends of the cables, and I'm doing the wiring. This one right here works perfectly, giving it juice, fires up the fan. This one right here, it just doesn't work at all. I tried a ton of different things. I tried restripping the cables, I tried a different battery, I tried everything you could think of, and it just doesn't seem to work. So that means the only way to fix it is to completely remove the ear, remove all the padding here, remove the little grate thing, replace the fan, and then put it all back together. I don't know why, but it's a huge pain in the butt, and I'll do it off camera, but this is just another example of something that should have taken me 5 to 10 minutes is now taking me a whole day or two. It's a huge pain in the butt, but in the end, we will get this fursuit done. While we fix our ears, let's go ahead and talk about the next thing that we need to do in order to finish our protogen, and that's adding the caps over the cheeks. One of the distinctive elements of protogens is their unique cutie marks or logos that are illuminated on the side of their head. I wanted our logo to be something techy and simple, so here are a few cardboard examples I made before settling on the final version. Okay YouTube chat, let me tell you the story of how we went from this first design to our final design and all of the incredibly painful lessons we had to learn along the way. The very first thing I did was I created a template just mapping out the relative size of the hole in the side of the head. I basically use this to base everything off of, and it kind of screws us over way down the road. The first plan is that we were going to use spray paint to kind of get our logo design and then map that out using our opaque plastic. Here's a really rough version I made originally. It was pretty goofy, but the idea was just to test out the materials just to see if the idea would work. And then I tried to come up with some more final versions. So here's one that I made using spray paint that didn't really work at all. When it ended up drying, it ended up peeling off and just total failure. But the second one ended up being a lot better and honestly one of the best that we created. So this was done with spray paint over a layer of primer with a bunch of gloss on top of it, and it worked quite well. The only problem was I wasn't super happy with it. If you look really closely, the logo is still kind of scuffed, and I needed to make a second one, so I figured no big deal, we'll make one more. So while waiting for this guy to dry, I went ahead and messed around with some different materials. I first tried a really powerful black marker, like a Sharpie, but way more powerful. And as you can see, it looks pretty good. The idea was really just to mess with materials, and I think for that, it worked kind of cool. Next, I made a different version using a Posca paint pen, and this too worked out surprisingly well. The logo is way more crisp because I can use a ruler to get the lines really perfect. And if you don't know this, with paint pens, like Posca pens, if you use rubbing alcohol on a hard surface, you can erase it really easily. So like if you get it on this table or on this plastic, you just give it a little squirt with rubbing alcohol and you can just wipe the Posca paint away to make sure that you can redo parts. And it was at this moment that I also realized that our original template that we made a long time ago is just not right. This is really frustrating. This is a classic example of check your measurements twice because this piece here was totally wrong, so I ended up having to make a brand new one. And then finally, with this piece here, I was able to make the final version you see at the end, and then with that, I simply added some paint to the back. The whole process ended up taking several days. It was a huge pain in the butt, and this isn't even close to all the different side pieces I made. But the most important takeaway with this whole thing is that with persistence and really trying over and over again and improving yourself, you can end up with some pretty satisfying results. To take a break from talking about the side panels, let's knock out some more wiring. Now that we have the computer and display done, we can instead turn our attention to the fans at the back of the head. Just like before, we're going to strip and solder all of these wires to make them long enough to plug into our battery. Wiring is one of those things that people either love or hate. A helpful tip is to start at one end and to slowly work your way to the other, tidying up as you go along. Zip strips and Velcro are your best friend, and it's incredibly satisfying seeing everything come together in the end. Now that we have the wires out of the way, we can go ahead and figure out how to mount our cool little cheek pieces to the head. The plan is to attach small plastic tabs to the inside of the opening, then we can super glue magnets to it. In order to hold our plastic tabs in place while the glue dries, I'm just using a wad of tape stuck to the inside of the head. Sometimes it's not about being pretty, and instead it's just about getting the job done. This is basically the same process we used for the visor, and it worked pretty well there, so I'm hoping it'll work really well here too. Once the glue is dried, we can go ahead and finish by attaching magnets to the back of the plastic from before. These side panels turned out looking lovely, even if they were a colossal pain in the ass to make. Now we can move on to the last remaining task we have for this episode, and that's creating the charging cable for a protogen. All we need to do is get it soldered together and cleaned up. With our big long cable done, we can officially call the wiring done for our protogen. What that means is that we can take any one of these cables and simply plug it into our battery to turn it on. This means that we can basically control the entire protogen from this battery pack here. I don't know if you've ever used a smartphone where the charging cable is just a hair too short, but it's really frustrating. So I went ahead and made this cable really long so that whenever you take the head off and on while fursuiting, it's actually quite easy. The eagle-eyed among you will have noticed that there's a slight problem with our battery, where we only have 2 ports, but we have 5 cables, but nonetheless, I've actually ordered a second battery. Not only that, we can plug in all of our fans into it, giving us the option to turn off all our fans on and off, which is a single button click. The other big exciting thing, now that we have the wiring done, is that we can now try on the head with all of the electronics and LEDs running while wearing it. So all I'm going to do is take our battery pack and extra wires here and stick them in my back pocket. In the future, I have an idea where we're going to have like a belt on or something like that to keep all of the batteries contained. But the only thing we have to do left now is to go ahead and put the head on just like a helmet. So what do you think, YouTube chat? I don't know about you, but I'm thinking this is like pretty darn cool. So now that we have all of the wiring done for our protogen, we can quickly talk about the last remaining project that we have before we can finally call our protogen head done, and that's furring the head. In the next episode, we're going to talk about patterning everything out, cutting out all of our pieces, and getting all the fur attached to the ears and the head. It's the last major thing that we need to do before we can finally call our protogen finished. So with all that being said, I thank you guys again so much, and I can't wait to see you guys again soon. Coming up on building a fursuit from scratch, tonight we make a mess with some tape, give our dog a much needed haircut, and try on an unbelievably heavy pair of goggles. Hi, I'm Waffles, and in this episode of building a protogen from scratch, we finally finish our head. In the last episode, we went ahead and completed the wiring for electronics, leaving only the fur left. Tonight, the plan is to add all of the fur to the head, finish up the detail work, and go ahead and try it on. But before we get to the fur, there's one last thing that we need to do. To start things off, we're going to go ahead and add a lycra liner to the inside of our head. Step 1 is to lay out our fabric, making sure to then fold it over on itself. Adding a liner is important for a couple of reasons. First, it'll make putting on the head a lot easier. The lycra is slick and smooth, while the upholstery foam has like a rough sandpaper texture. Second, it'll also help keep you cool. The lycra will wick away sweat from your body, helping to cool you off. Now, a trick you can use to make one yourself is to simply copy a balaclava if you own one. If you trace it out with a marker, you can get a fairly good pattern to use for yourself. Once we've copied everything out, we can go ahead and then pin both layers of our fabric together. Next, a trip to the sewing machine means that we can quickly knock this together, making sure not to sew the face shut. Finally, all we need to do is trim the excess fabric off with a pair of scissors. Now, I know it looks a little ugly, but it'll do exactly what we need to, and all of our ugly seams will be hidden on the inside of the head. Now that we have our balaclava cut out, we can go ahead and glue it inside the head. This is surprisingly difficult, as the fabric is quite stretchy and it tends not to stick when you glue it down. Going slow and waiting for each section to dry is key. Going too fast and you run the risk of having to start over, or worse, spilling glue on your electronics. So now that we've gotten our balaclava glued in place, we've come across the first real problem, and that's our balaclava is round and our head is a triangle. If you notice, we have this gap in between the lycra liner we just sewed together and then the actual frame of the head. We're gonna have to create a piece that fits in this gap and then glue it to the base and sew it to the liner. This would have been way easier to do before gluing everything in, but too little too late. The next thing that we need to do is finish this piece here. As a general rule of thumb, you can make just about anything if you first cover it in tape. In order to fix this hole, we're going to make a quick and dirty template that we can use to cut out a new piece of lycra. Using our tape template, we can go ahead and get a rough idea of what the piece is going to look like that we're going to need. The key is, whenever you make parts like this, is to only make a really accurate half that you can then flip over. That'll guarantee symmetry on the piece that you make. Once we've gone ahead and sewed that to our original headliner, we can go ahead and take the other end and hot glue it to the inside of the frame. The final results might look a little messy, but it's our little mess, so that makes it okay. In the end, this piece is purely functional and it'll all be covered up anyways. With the liner complete, we can go ahead and move on to the part that everyone is the most excited about, the fur. We're using the same trick as before. Cover everything in a big layer of tape and then just figure it out as we go along. Now comes to the fun part, and that's creating the design for our ears. Off camera, I created a few different mock-ups and just ended up going with the one I like the most. With stuff like this, I find it's best just to go with your gut. Once everything is marked out, we can go ahead and get a much better idea of what we're building. Satisfied that our pattern is correct, we can then use those same lines to cut apart our duct tape. After all of that shaving and cutting, we ended up with 18 pieces of fur. Now, just like a Lego set, we can go ahead and put it back together. So now that we've gotten our pieces mostly sewed together, all we need to do is connect these two guys together and then we should have our finished ear. But before we do that, I want to go ahead and just test fit everything. So I've mocked up what it should look like here and I think it's looking pretty good. There is one thing that we need to do first though, and that's get this little piece here in place because this fur is going to go over on top of it. So the next step that we need to do is cut out some felt and then glue it to the inside of our ear before we can attach the fur for our ear. Adding the inner ear felt is one of my favorite steps in building a fursuit. It's the first real fabric adding to the head with the sole purpose of making us look good. Somewhere along the way, our pattern kind of got off a little bit because now that I've come to attach the fur, things are just a little bit too oversized. I think instead of just forcing this on, we're gonna go ahead and just freehand it and chop this piece of fur off, and then we can reattach it with hopefully much tighter tolerances. It's something that I think in the end will make the final product look a lot better. So let's go ahead, chop up some fur, and finish the furring for this ears. Oftentimes, a pattern isn't right the first time, and that's okay. Being flexible and willing to change as you go along will make the whole process a lot smoother. All of these parts are hand sewed together using a blanket stitch. Sewing all these edges together feels relaxing and straightforward compared to the electrical work from before. It's a nice activity to put a podcast on and just grind out. So we've gone ahead and gotten these seams all sewed together, and our ear is finally starting to come together and it's looking pretty good. Now, there are two pieces that we need to add left, and they're going to go right here on the inside. One facing here, and then another one at a right angle. And what that is, it's going to be a piece with the fur on the inside pointed up. That should give us a pretty cool 3D fur effect and hide this little seam right here. Now with the ears done, we can go ahead and start the fur for the rest of the head and shoulders. We started with the ears because it's going to make things a lot easier to attach together once we get the fur done for the head. All of the wiring will eventually be hidden under the fur, so it's important to carefully mask it up. It would be all too easy to accidentally pull out a wire or cut something in half, and man, that would be a huge pain in the butt to fix. All of the taping I'm doing for the pattern is looking really scuffed. We ran out of duct tape and this masking tape just isn't working, so I think I'm gonna switch back to our incredibly sticky black tape and then just try to finish it off. If you've never used one of these mannequin heads before, they make making the neck and head way easier for the patterning. It's just, you have a base you can work off of and you can get basically all of these patterns for free. Now that we've gotten everything taped up, we can go ahead and draw the lines on for where we're going to cut out our pattern pieces. I don't know if there's a trick to quite figure out where the lines are going to go, but always remember, if you cut it out and it lays flat, you're good to attack, but if it curls, your fur is going to make you hurl. So just remember that when cutting your fur out and you'll be good to go. So let's get the lines drawn on and all of our pattern pieces cut out. Here's a good example of what I was talking about before. See how this piece of tape stands up on its own? If you just try and use that to cut out your fur, you'll have a bad time putting it back together. Instead, just draw a line where it bends up and then cut it in half. One of my favorite things about making fursuits is Tetrising on all of the pattern pieces onto the fur. If you're really good at it, you can make a yard of fur last a long time. It's quite satisfying when you can get it all to line up perfectly and turn like one last little piece into all the fur you need. I've been debating whether or not we're going to do a bodysuit, and the answer is still, I don't know. On one hand, I really do think protogens look a lot better with the bodysuit, so it'd be kind of lacking to build this really cool head on a cool bodysuit. But on the other hand, I kind of want to experiment with different video ideas. Fursuit from scratch is a really fun project and all, but I think there are ways we can do content similarly that would end up being a lot better that isn't just me building a whole fursuit piece by piece. I don't know yet. I've been doing a lot of thinking about it, but until then, we're getting pretty darn close to finishing our little protogen head. Making our way down the head, we can start assembling plastic or the foam of the ears that we want to hide that edge from the viewer seeing. To do this, we're very carefully cutting a long strip of felt that we'll carefully glue to hide that edge. It's just like getting to the end of a painting and then busting out the white highlighter pen. Little details like this really help make everything pop. Now that we have everything glued in place, we can go ahead and give our protogen a haircut. This last bit of cleaning and trimming is some of the most rewarding in the entire project. Trimming all the loose ends and cutting off the random tufts of fur helps show the clean lines and smooth edges of our protogen. One trick you can use while shaving the fur is to constantly be moving. Just like with sculpting, you always want to be getting a new perspective on what you're working with and avoid overworking any one area. So YouTube chat, we've made it to the end of another episode of building a fursuit from scratch, and I think it's a really important one. We've done it, we finally finished the protogen head, and I think it's turning out really good. Now, with all that being said, there's still one last thing that we need to do. We need to try on our protogen head, because I don't know about you, I'm quite excited to see how it is. Now, I'll be honest with you, I don't know if there's a dignified way to put this on, but from my testing, I found it's almost easiest to put it on a table or bed or somewhere, and then just kind of shimmy or slide your head into it. The head itself is just a little bit tight, and that's probably from all of the foam and padding and stuff we added, but look, it fits surprisingly well. It's very snug, and my field of vision is like this, so actually a lot compared to most fursuits. It's surprisingly good visibility. So what do you think, YouTube chat? Has this protogen been living up to your expectations? Because I think it looks really cool. I'm quite happy with how it's turning out. One of the coolest features I think we added is actually the magnetic visor. It makes it really easy to take this on and off, and whenever you get hot, you can just pop it right off. I'm quite happy with how well it works too. And to put it back on, it's just a simple, you just snap it right on. It's surprisingly easy. Now, the next thing I wanted to test out was the fans to see how well they'd cool the head down using our extra battery pack. Now, I don't know if you can hear me over all these fans, but a surprising amount of airflow is being moved through the 3 fans. The top ones, not so much, but they're definitely doing their job of getting rid of the hot air from the top of your head and pulling in fresh, cold air from the bottom down here. Now YouTube chat, there's one last thing I'm gonna ask of you. Could you go ahead and like the video and check to see if you're subscribed? It's something that's free that you can do to help show your support for this channel, because trust me, building this protogen is a lot of work. Now, I can't wait to see you guys again soon. Next episode, we build the bodysuit. Coming up on building a fursuit from scratch, tonight, we build our own crash test dummy. I point at a sewing machine, and we try on an incredibly silly pair of pants. Hi, my name is Waffles, and on this episode of building a protogen from scratch, we're tackling building the bodysuit for our fursuit. On the previous episode, we went ahead and finished the head. On this episode, we're tackling building the rest of our costume. A fursuit bodysuit is essentially a jumpsuit made out of fur tailored to fit your body. It's a one-piece outfit, and it's what separates partial fursuits from full suits. Now, this all sounds great in theory, but there's a problem. How do you actually create one yourself? The solution is actually quite simple. We're going to use something called a duct tape dummy, or DTD for short. A DTD is a cheap and easy way to create a mannequin of your body that you can then use to create the templates needed to create your own fursuit. Our plan this episode is actually quite simple. First, create a pattern of our bodysuit using a DTD, cut out all of our pieces of fur, sew everything together, and then finally add the smaller details. Now, before we can start working on or creating our DTD, I want to first talk about the fur that we're going to use for this project and the sponsor for this episode. Now, if you've always wanted to build your own fursuit, one of the first questions that you might have is, where do you buy the fur for your fursuit? That's where Big Z Fabrics comes in. For our protogen, we're going to be using their solid, shabby, long pile fur, and it's going to be part of their Eco Shag line of products. I've been using their fur for a couple of years now on my fursuits, and I've always been really happy with the quality and how well it performs. Right now, Big Z Fabrics has over 60 colors of fur to choose from, with more coming later this year. Perfect for that sparkle dog fursuit you've always wanted to create. Or Big Z offers wholesale pricing when you order 7 or more yards of fur. And they don't just have fur too, their solid poly spandex works great as a liner on the inside of your fursuit. Big Z also wants you to know that it's some of the cheapest fur per yard prices and flexible shipping options. Personally, I recommend buying swatches of all the colors of fur that you might use. It's a great way to test things out before spending all of your money on several yards of fur. So with all that being said, thank you to Big Z Fabrics for sponsoring this project and providing the fur for our protogen. When you first make your duct tape dummy, it's a huge mess of tape and fabric. The process to create one is basically put on a pair of disposable painter's overalls and then have your friends systematically cover you in tape. Once they're finished and you're cut free, you're effectively left with a second pair of skin made entirely of duct tape. Our goal here is to get a one-to-one copy of our body, and before we can do that, we first need to clean things up. We can start by filling in all of the places cut open to set us free, and then sealing in the ends of our arms and legs and making them shut. With everything patched up and sealed, we can go ahead and stuff the whole thing full of polyfill. Now that we have a mannequin to work with, we can really start playing with fire. One of the most powerful things about having a DTD is that it's a reliable way to get accurate measurements of your body. For example, if you measure the length all the way down the side of the DTD, you'll have a good idea of how long your bodysuit will need to be. Once satisfied with all of our measurements, you can use a marker to go ahead and start drawing out all of our pattern pieces. Now that we have everything measured and marked out, we can begin the process of cutting apart our DTD. There comes a point whenever you work with a duct tape dummy and it just kind of explodes. So I think it's done its job, and now we can get rid of all of the polyfill and really break this thing apart into little pieces. I'm gonna go ahead, cut the whole thing up, and then show you all of the rest that we're gonna need to do to go ahead and build our bodysuit. So we've gone ahead and cut out all of our pieces, and you can see it's actually not that lot. It's a total of 9 pieces with 2 for the front and back of the chest, 1 for the belly, 4 for the arms, and then 2 for the bottom of the legs. The reason why the arms and legs are 2 pieces is that because we're going to start playing around with some of the fur lengths too in a little bit. But for now, the next step is to go ahead and get all these pieces cut out. One thing I'm going to do before that is actually just to go ahead and record a bunch of measurements just for my own personal notes. And that's just going to make putting this thing back together a lot easier. Because remember, this line here should be straight, and as you can see, it has a pretty good wiggle wobble to it. One slight issue I noticed while tracing out our pattern is just a little bit too long for our entire length of fur. I found that quite a bit funny. It's gonna be pretty easy to fix. All we need to do is just chop off an end and then just sew it back together. But I was really hoping to get this entire pattern done in as few parts as possible. Nonetheless, the next time we do this, we'll just buy a bigger piece of fur. Now, with our pattern cleaned up, we can begin to mark out everything onto our fur. When tracing out the pattern, I'm more so using it as a guide instead of just blindly tracing it. Clean, smooth lines here will help make the final product look a lot better. A trick we're going to use is to only cut out half of the pattern and then flip it over to create the whole piece of fur. This helps for two big reasons. First, it helps make everything more symmetrical, and if everything is more symmetrical, it'll make sewing it together a lot easier. Something to keep a note when cutting out the arms and legs is that they're not perfectly straight tubes. Instead, they're more of a funnel shape that starts big at the body and then tapers off toward the end. Just like with drawing, it's important to keep in mind good shape language when designing your fursuit. So I have good news and I have bad news. The good news is that this bodysuit is actually turning out really good. This is a total of 3 pieces, and if I'm being totally honest, these 2 pieces here could just be 1 piece because my fur was too short. Speaking of fur, this is about half the bodysuit and I've totally used up that entire yard of fur. So I have another one on the way. So for now, we're just gonna work with what we have. And while that waits to ship in, we're gonna start sewing this here piece together. So to start, let's go ahead and attach these 2 smaller pieces to the bottom of the bodysuit. And then, while we wait for the fur, we can go ahead and cut out the belly on the other side. Now, while we wait for our fur to ship, let's go ahead and knock out a few random tasks that we can do just to keep ourselves busy. Starting with the hole for the neck. On the front side, I'm going to make a nice large kind of oval shape here. On the back side, I'm going to make a little bit of a smaller one. That means when we go ahead and put our 2 halves together, they should just come together nice and smooth. Now, in order to make the belly piece, we're going to go ahead and just use this piece and slap it on this fur and then just trace it out. I'm sure there's a smarter way to do it, but I can't think of it, and that should work perfectly fine. A funny thing about these 2 colors of fur, these were left over originally from the previous project, and I had a ton of this teal left. Now, somehow we've ended up in the exact same problem where we have way too much teal fur and basically no dark brown fur. I just think that's kind of funny. But nonetheless, let's go ahead and knock out this piece, then we can go ahead and sew it all together. A trick you can do to make a more accurate copy of your parts is to trim down the edges of fur. This will allow you to make a cleaner tracing when you copy it with a marker. Whenever you pin 2 pieces of fur together, you always want to go in kind of a star pattern. Just like tightening the lug nuts on a tire, going in a star pattern helps the fur from bunching up and makes the parts go together a lot easier. One small benefit to not having enough fur and needing to wait for the fur to show up before we continue is that I've remembered to add the zipper before sewing the bodysuit together. So that's the next task we're going to knock out, is attaching the zipper to the back of the bodysuit. That'll be just one more thing that we can do while we wait, and it should be way easier to do it now before everything is sewn together. To get our zipper ready, I first cut the extra material off the top and then cut the bottom down to size. Now we can pin it in place to the back of the bodysuit. A trick to making adding the zipper a lot easier is to first sew it to the body and then cut the fabric. This will make sure that it goes on nice and evenly and gives you that invisible zipper effect. Now that the zipper is attached to our bodysuit, we can carefully cut the fabric open. And finally, to fix any clumps from the sewing machine, we can run a slicker brush over the fur to help unstick any of the fibers. Now, with our shiny new box of fur in, we can go ahead and wrap up the last of the cutting, shaving, and sewing. So after an afternoon of sewing, we have our total half finished. It has the arms, the legs, the torso, it's all put together, and the other half is in a big crumpled ball right there. Now, the next part is honestly the hardest part about making a bodysuit, and that's combining the two pieces. The trick is we're gonna go kind of like seam by seam and work our way out, starting with the center, so we'll pin that together and then connect both of our halves. So let's go ahead, get the last bit of sewing done, and finally finish our bodysuit. Now that we have all the sewing done, we can go ahead and tackle the last thing on our list, which is adding the binding fabric to the neck. Binding fabric is a trim piece that covers the rough edge of our fur, preventing everything from unraveling and itching your neck. To make one, all you need to do is cut a long straight strip of Lycra and then fold each end in on itself. Then you take that and fold it over the rough edge of the fur. It looks complex and it's kind of fiddly and it falls apart, but with enough pins you can hold everything together while you sew it shut. Finally, we can turn everything inside out and then give it a good brushing to clean it all up. And now, with everything finally finished, we can go ahead and try our bodysuit on. So overall, I'm really happy with how this bodysuit turned out. I think the biggest thing for me was it was a huge learning process in just making a more professional fursuit. I did a lot more measuring in this one bodysuit than I probably have anywhere beforehand, and I think it really shows. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't a few more things we can improve. Specifically, it is quite tight. I think if I was going to do this bodysuit again, I'd make it probably 10 to 20% bigger. Because right now, this bodysuit fits me, but it probably doesn't fit anyone else. But overall, I'm quite happy with it. Now, there's one more thing that we need to do, and that's try it on with the head. Now, in the future, the plan is to have some sort of pocket in the bodysuit for the batteries, but for right now, we can just hold on to them. So, let us put on the visor. So you tell me, YouTube chat, has the protogen been living up to your expectations? What do you think we should build next? There's still a ton of different parts we have to do, and this isn't even close to being the final form. But I think it's been turning out really cool as we've been building it along the way. So with all of our hard work done, we can go ahead and call the bodysuit for protogen complete. In the next episode, we're probably going to focus on either the hands or the feet or the tail or the armor. I haven't quite figured it out yet, but it'll definitely be something cool. Now, before I sweat to death in this bodysuit, I'm going to go ahead and call this episode complete. But before I do, I ask you one last thing. Can you go ahead and check to make sure you're subscribed and give this video a like? It's something free that you can do to help show your support for this protogen project, and it helps me out immensely with the YouTube algorithm. I thank you guys again so much, and I can't wait to see you guys again soon. Coming up on building a protogen from scratch, tonight we bake a delicious synthetic cake, I create the most advanced piece of foam yet, and we create the most valuable form of trash. Hi, my name is Waffles, and on this episode of building a protogen from scratch, we build our very own cybernetic suit of armor. On the previous episode, we went ahead and finished our bodysuit, and on this episode, we build something even cooler. Protogens are a fictional species that blend robotic traits with the body of a land shark. These cybernetic coyotes are normally spotted wearing the finest of digital drift, so that's what we're going to build next. The plan is, we're going to start with the hardest part first, the legs. Here's the problem though, I've never made a protogen before, let alone a pair of robotic pants. When breaking down the armor on a protogen, there are basically four major parts. You have the two shoulder pieces up here, a chest piece, a belt piece, and then two large thigh pieces of armor. Now, it's all going to be quite annoying and tricky to build, but I've always been under the belief that you should start with the hardest piece first. And just looking at this, the largest piece and probably the most complex is going to be these two large thigh pieces. They're this weird kind of egg-shaped teardrop piece, and it's going to be quite difficult replicating that in 3D material at a much larger scale. I don't know about you guys, but I've never made a protogen armor before, let alone any armor at all. So because of that, we're going to use Mugiwara's protogen armor pattern, and with that, hopefully we should be able to get some rough shapes that we can then modify ourselves. So let's start by cutting out the pattern for the thighs, and then just getting it mocked up on cardboard to see what it's going to look like. If you've never used a pattern before, it can help make creating new things a lot easier. The first step is going to be cutting out all the pieces and then gluing them together. This doesn't need to be perfect, but it does help to go slow and make sure to do everything correct. A mistake here could be magnified when we convert our paper templates into foam. Once complete, this should give us a good starting point for building our protogen pants. So now that we have all of our paper templates cut apart, we can go ahead and mock it up in cardboard. And the reason why we're doing it in cardboard first is because our foam is surprisingly inexpensive and will almost certainly make mistakes and want to modify things. Once it's in cardboard, we can put it together and just get a rough idea of what we're going to build. So let's get all of our pieces cut apart and then just start taping them together to see how this is going to look. Cardboard is one of my favorite materials to work with. It's cheap, easy to cut, and allows you to quickly fail at making stuff. A general rule of thumb is that if you don't know how to make something, first make it out of cardboard. Cardboard isn't just a simple material, it's a versatile medium that holds an endless creative potential. I've always been fascinated with its ability to transform from a pointless packing paper to primitive preliminary prototypes. Remember, it's not about the material itself, instead it's how you choose to get creative with what you have around you. And in case you're wondering how these patterns work, if you look here, there are these indexes that go along the paper, and all you do is line them up and then attach them. Because they're at an angle like this, it'll convert a 2D object into a 3D kind of sphere. In theory, all that really means is we can take our parts, line them up, and tape it all together. That should be how it works in theory, but let's go ahead and start taping this thing together. So our cardboard creation actually turned out looking pretty cool. I think it mimics the protogen armor effect quite well, and it fits pretty snugly on my body. Now, when we remake this in foam, I will make it like a time and a half larger. This is a good size now, but you figure when the fursuit's actually on, my body's gonna be larger, so bigger will probably be a bit better. Now, the next thing that we need to do is cut out this entire piece again, but with foam. The type of foam we're using to build our armor is ethylene vinyl acetate, or EVA foam. It's popular because it's easy to use and relatively cheap, making it the backbone for custom cosplay props. When tracing the paper templates on the foam, I'm adding an extra 1.5 inches of space to help grow everything up in size. You also might notice that we're building this out of a random assortment of foam. Remember that because it definitely won't come back to bite us in the butt later. So now that we have much larger versions of all our pieces, we can go ahead and attempt to assemble our supersized protogen armor. I think the first step in order to get us moving is just to start pinning things together. This definitely won't be easy, but with enough pins and hot glue, everything is possible. Now, I'm taking a quick break from putting these panels together, and I just wanted to quickly talk about the process. So I'm starting everything out with the hot air gun, and that just makes the EVA foam a lot easier to work with and like softer. From there, I'm just pinning everything together, and then finally just tacking it together with a bead of hot glue. I'm kind of worried about that ripping, but we'll cross that bridge when we get there. Now, the next thing that I want to do is complete these entire pieces and get the rest of it all glued together. And then from there, we can talk about fixing a few things and making it generally just a lot prettier. I'm also filming this on my phone because the battery for my camera finally died. Hi, YouTube chat. I've gone ahead and finished putting together all of the giant puzzle pieces for a pattern, and I want to show you the results. And be warned, it's kind of scuffed. So I went ahead and also taped together the paper template now that we don't need them anymore, just because it helps kind of visualize what this should look like. For the most part, everything looks pretty good. It's just a really large version of original pattern until you flip it over and you'll notice that we're missing this whole section down here. This is definitely my fault in enlarging the pattern. I've somehow missed like 3 inches on the whole bottom, but it should still be fixable. The plan is I'm gonna take a whole bunch of this cardboard and cut out some templates and then just kind of tack everything together. It'll definitely be messy, but with enough Bondo and primer and paint, no one will ever be able to tell there's tons of seams down here. And then there's also one other issue. One of the original problems that we had with the pattern was that it's too small for my body. So in making this one, I made a point to make it quite a bit larger. I might have made it a little bit too large, as this is definitely way more of a gap than there needs to be, but in general, it's always a lot easier to make big things smaller as making small things big. So I think with some strategic like trimming and cutting apart, we can get this quite a bit smaller. So I've gone ahead and finished cleaning up the bottom of our little thigh armor pieces here. And as you can see, they're looking really good. But while doing this, I noticed another issue. If you look at our 2 different types of foam here, this white foam in a lot of cases has kind of bent in on itself. You can kind of see it here, and it really doesn't look all that good. So I think I'm going to begrudgingly go ahead and replace this white foam with just a different piece, or at least attempt to straighten it out. It sucks going back and redoing old work, but I think it'll make the final product look a lot better. So I'm going to go ahead and knock all of that out off camera, but instead I want to go ahead and show you guys something new. In the last episode, we finished building the bodysuit of our protogen, and since then I've finished all the extra parts for it. Starting things off, I created a classic S-shaped tail. I'm currently playing around with the idea of adding some sort of little bag or armor piece to the back of it, but for now, this will do. The end attaches with a simple belt cloth that's fed into a hole hidden on the bodysuit. Making the tail is probably one of the easiest parts, so if you ever want to build your own fursuit, this could be a great place to start. Next up, we have the hand paws, and these are just slightly upgraded versions from the one I made before. The main difference is that I wanted to focus on quality when making these. The pattern is actually just 2 big hand pieces with plush claws attached. It looks complex, but it's actually just a few pieces total. These could still be improved, but I'm pretty happy with how they turned out. Speaking of improvements, the biggest improvement I made from the last suit are these feet paws. One of the biggest challenges when creating paws are having well-defined shapes that don't just end up looking like blobs of fur. The same technique from the hand paws are used here for the paw pads. The only difference is that they're much larger. These paws have an upholstery foam base and contain a pair of hidden crocs on the inside. Another perk of having individual toes is being able to slide your hand through them like this. Now that's satisfying. Indoor feet without shoes are kind of useless because if you use them, they get destroyed. So in order to protect our new shiny paws, I went ahead and created some custom sandals to go with them. My favorite little detail is the matching colored thread used on the buckles. Nice. Now that we've all the new parts covered, we can go ahead and return to our fortress of foam. With everything somewhat glued together, we can now start focusing on cleaning it all up. One of the ways you can achieve a more slimming fit is by adding darts to the foam to remove all the extra space. From there, it's just a lot of trimming and test fitting to get everything to fit down to size. Ooh, YouTube chat, check it out. We finally have the finished armor leg pieces for our protogen. Now, it's been a lot of work to get here, surprisingly a lot more than I expected, and they look a little bit different than you last saw them, so let's quickly talk about it. I went ahead and replaced all of the front pieces with brand new ones. The ones before had these big ugly lines right down the center, where we had split them apart to do the fitting. So instead, I just popped them out and then cut out a brand new piece of foam and then attached it. It's kind of a waste, but I think it makes the end result look a lot better. Now, we can finally move on to the next step, which is going to be painting, priming, and then finding a way to fill in all of the cracks where the foam comes together. The biggest mistake made during this project was using a silicone sealer to fill in all the gaps of the foam. I don't know it yet, but all that silicone being spread around isn't sandable, and when dries, it gives a really rough, ugly finish. Off camera, I had to use Bondo to resurface everything and then spend the whole weekend sanding it down flush. The first step in preparing for painting is to seal the ends of the foam using a heat gun. If you try and paint foam before treating it, you'll quickly run into a problem. The foam acts as a giant sponge and just absorbs all the paint. The first step in preparing it for painting is heating the surface with a heat gun. This will melt down all of the plastic pores, leaving it nice and clean and flat. Next, we can give everything a thorough coating in a matte medium that will act as the base for all of our paint to stick to. Now, with everything prepared, we can give everything a nice bath and primer. While doing all of the spray painting and priming, I've actually run out of spray paint, and that's why this guy here looks kind of goofy, but I think that's just the universe telling me that this is a natural stopping point for this episode. Now, if I'm being totally honest with you, making these pieces was a lot harder than I expected. Off camera, I'm almost certainly going to do more painting, sanding, and priming to get these looking a little bit better, but I think the overall shape is almost exactly what we're going for, like a cool cybernetic armor piece. Once we get the rest of the armor in place, like the belt and the chest piece and the shoulders, I think it's going to look really good. Overall, I'm quite happy with how these pieces are turning out so far, even if they were a huge pain in the butt to make. In the next episode of making a fursuit from scratch, we're really going to focus on building the rest of our armor. Once we have all the big pieces done, we can then try to figure out the problem of hooking up to our body. I'm thinking maybe a cool harness or something to that effect. But once we have all the main armor pieces done, then we can focus on doing all the fun, cool details. Stuff like LEDs or maybe like a cool backpack. I have a lot of fun ideas planned, but first we need to knock out getting all of the armor done. And I also want to apologize to you, YouTube, with just how long this episode took to make. In the end, I think I made 3 separate versions of these legs, and I'm still not quite happy with how they turned out. But you know what they say, perfect is the enemy of actually getting stuff done, so I think we're just gonna go with these. So on our quest to build some cybernetic protogen armor, I just wanted to say thanks for watching, and I can't wait to see you guys again soon. Welcome back to building a fursuit from scratch. Tonight, we speed run waiting for glue to dry. I attempt the impossible by cutting some foam in half. And we create a permanent temporary fix. Hi, my name is Waffles, and on this episode of building a protogen from scratch, we finally finish our cybernetic suit of armor. In the last episode, we created these 2 massive foam monoliths that'll serve as the legs to our cosplay armor. We had a lot of problems creating these, but in the end, we're successful in learning how to sculpt with foam. This time though, it's even harder. Not only do we finish the rest of the armor, we also need to find a way to put it all together. So with our goal to finish the rest of the armor, let's quickly talk about what we have remaining. First, we have the 2 little shoulder guys, then the chest piece, and then finally the belt piece down here. When working on new projects, I like to start with the largest thing and then work my way smaller. So let's go ahead and begin with the chest piece. In order to make things go a little bit smoother, I'm using Mugiwara's protogen armor pattern that I pre-printed. This pattern will act as a rough guide and should make cutting out the basic shapes a lot easier. To start things off, I go ahead and line up all the paper to get a rough idea of what the pieces are going to look like. Once satisfied with the layout, I go ahead and start cutting out and gluing everything together. The first problem that I ran into is that the pattern is just a little bit too small for me. To solve this, I added a 1/2-inch border to the edge. This should scale everything evenly, making the final piece of armor a little bit larger. With everything cut out, we can now transfer it over to the foam. I'm using 5mm thick EVA foam. Last episode, I tried several different types of foam, and I found that this was what worked the best. After completing all the cutting, we can now go ahead and start assembling our discount set of Legos. Learning from our mistake last episode, I'm gluing everything together with super glue instead of hot glue. This should allow us to glue the ends together flush instead of hot glue and make a mess everywhere. And I say easier, this is still by far the hardest part. As I glue the seams, it transforms the flat 2D object into something 3D. That creates tension which is stored inside the seams, making them easily pop apart. This process took a lot longer than I expected because each section needed to dry completely before moving on. After spending an afternoon accidentally gluing my hand to the table, we finally finished our chest armor piece. I think it's looking pretty sweet. The only small issue is that our seams are coming apart in a few spots. Nonetheless, I think there's still a few more things we can quickly knock out. First, let's go ahead and trim all these edges so they look really nice. I think once that's done, this piece should look a lot prettier. And then, to deal with these seams, let's take a piece of felt and then hot glue it over the seams right here. The felt's going to do a great job of making everything stronger, and once it's hot glued in place, we won't have to worry about this thing falling apart while fursuiting around. Now that all the felt backing is added, I can go ahead and try it on. What I'm looking for here is the general look of the foam and making sure that everything is symmetrical. The next step is going to be combining the halves together and then cleaning everything up. First, I glue the tops together, making sure to add a little bit of felt for strength. Next, I glue the side shut, but this is where we run into our first problem. In order to actually wear the armor, we'll need some way to put it on. So here's the plan. I'm going to add a zipper to both halves of the armor and then use that to get everything shut. This zipper should make it possible to actually wear our fortress of foam. Now that is some ugly looking hot gluing. So now with the zipper on, we can hopefully try this guy on. And I don't think I can do the zipper up by myself, but you guys should get the idea that we have a cool new chest piece of armor. Now, something I'm noticing immediately is that this armhole is just a hair too small, so we'll probably need to enlarge that a little bit, but I think this is a pretty great starting point. Now, before we get into all the painting and filling and sanding, let's just go ahead and knock out some of the rest of the pieces. Let's do next the little shoulder guys, and from there we can kind of reevaluate and figure out what we want to do next. The next thing on the to-do list is knocking out the belt piece. This should be more or less the same kind of work. The real challenge here is going to be getting everything glued together strong enough so that it doesn't immediately fall apart. One of my favorite parts about fursuit making is watching everything slowly come together. You spend hours doing long, lonely work, watching raw materials slowly transform into something new. By the end of this adventure, you find yourself holding a remarkably personal creation born of your own hands. Now, I know what you guys are all thinking, damn, where did I get such a cool pair of pants? Now, this still looks a little goofy, but we're definitely moving in the right direction. Now that we have the chest piece done and the kind of belt piece, we have a good idea of how this armor set's kind of going. There are a lot of little things that I want to do. For example, probably trim this armor to be a little bit shorter and possibly replace the zipper with like a Velcro solution or something a bit easier. But for now, we're moving in the right track. Once we have all of the big pieces done, we can then start talking about all of the finer details. But until then, we're just kind of guesstimating. So let's go ahead and knock out the shoulder pieces and finally finish all the big pieces for a set of armor. The shoulder pads are the smallest part we're making here today, but that doesn't mean it's going to be easy. Making complex curves is always hard and requires a little trial and error. The first thing that I do to get started is cut out all of the parts in foam. My favorite way to cut this foam is using a very sharp craft knife. These knives are both cheap and sharp, but that's only if you regularly change the blade. And please make sure to dispose of the blade somewhere safe as opposed to just throwing it in the trash. And finally, with a little glue and felt, we can hold it all together. So now that we have everything glued and put together, we can go ahead and size it up for fitting. One thing to keep in mind is that the bottom of our little shoulder pieces here are flat, but your arm is actually more of a cylinder. So when we attach it to the arm, we're gonna have to cut like a U into it, just so it'll fit nice and flush. These little armor pieces are turning out fairly cool, and it'll look a lot better once we have a screen on them and some black paint and the LEDs are on place. But for now, with just the goal of getting all the big things done, they're in a pretty good spot. Now, the next thing that I want to tackle in this episode is just trimming everything up to size. Right now, the parts are still a hair bit too big, and we're going to need to come up with some sort of way to actually strap it to the body. Because if you just wear this piece as a belt now, it'll probably fall down while you're fursuiting. So let's come up with an over-engineered strap to keep it held to your body. Okay, so here's the plan. I'm gonna build a belt and hang everything off of it. And the way I'm gonna do that requires some nylon strapping and a whole lot of brackets. I recently picked up a 3D printer, specifically an Ender 3, as an upgrade to the shop. So far, it's been a reliable bracket producing machine, creating all these plastic components. After using a 3D printed base for this project, I've been really happy with them, and for the next Fursuit I build, I definitely want to print my own. First off, I need to create all of the straps that are going to hold this thing together. I test fit everything together, and once it all looks correct, I hit it with the sewing machine.
Put you in a trance, let's party. Boogie in your body, want that body, want that body.
Since the last time you guys have seen the leg pieces, I've made just a few upgrades. Starting off, I went ahead and added this trim piece that goes around the top. That's just to help it sit more flush against the body. And then on the inside, if you can see it, I've added a bunch of structural bracing just to make this thing a lot more sturdy. Now, let's go ahead and figure out how we're going to mount this to the actual body. I'm leaving all these straps long on purpose, and that's just to make balancing everything out a lot easier. Once I'm happy with the length, I go ahead and snip the end. If you use a lighter, you can melt the end to prevent it from fraying. The final result looks like a climbing harness for an octopus, and its sprawling appendages should help keep everything in place. I'm sure there's a better way to do this, but you have to admit it looks pretty cool. So with a lot of the big parts knocked out, let's go ahead and try to put this entire puzzle piece together. I think I'm going to start with the bodysuit. Now, the bodysuit is not long for this world. Next episode, we'll probably be making some pretty heavy modifications to it. But for now, it'll serve its purpose as just like the under fur garment. Looking a lot better already. Now the next thing that we're going to put on is the belt piece, and from there we can go ahead and attach our big leg armor pieces. I will say it's just a hair snug, but I think we're going to have to just live with that. I'm also trying to straight out as many of these little hookups as I can, just to make it a little bit easier when I attach the legs. These bodysuit armor pieces should also look a hell of a lot better once they're painted black and have some LEDs embedded in them too. One of the hard parts is tightening these straps down while also putting it on. It might honestly be easier just to do it when it's all off again, but I'm trying my best right now. I probably should have thought about this beforehand, but I'm not exactly sure how to put these paws on with the armor pieces, but I'll try my best. One slight downside of this costume is just how big it is. It's hard to fit on camera. So now that we have our paws in place, let's go ahead and add the chest armor. Also, the eagled eye among you will notice that I actually left off the tail. Now, that's really just because I'm kind of lazy, because to put on the tail, I need to undo all the straps and stuff again, and I can't be bothered. In the future, we might come up with a cool quick latch or something, but for now, we'll just see how it looks without it. Another thing that I definitely want to change is this armor piece. From having a zipper on the side to instead like a Velcro or something. That'll make this a lot easier to put on, and it should be a fairly easy fix. And now for the trickiest part, let's go ahead and pop on the helmet to kind of finally see how this whole thing looks when put together. One thing you might have noticed I didn't consider, and that was the neck interacting with the chest armor. I think I'm going to redo some of the pieces of the chest armor to make this a little bit easier in the future, but for now I'm going to quick pop this off and then have it go over the neck fur just to see how it looks. I almost forgot about the paws. When I put this on in the future, hopefully I'll have just a little bit more help, but for now it should get the point across. So you tell me, YouTube, is this whole fursuit turning out pretty cool? I'm quite happy with the results. Now, before I dye in an oven, let me go ahead and take this thing off. Now, I know the test fitting we just did went kind of rough, and there's definitely things we can improve on, but we're in a really good spot for our protogen. In this episode, we went ahead and finished all the major armor pieces, and I think we're in a really good spot overall. Next episode, I want to go ahead and clean everything up and finish some of the more detail work. We also need to redo kind of the chest body piece. Before, it was running into some issues while trying it on, so I think I have some ways we can build it a little bit better, and a cool idea might be to add a little backpack that contains our batteries instead of having us carry them around everywhere. Also, if you've made it this far in a video about building protogens, you probably love fursuits. So go ahead, check to see if you're subscribed, and if these videos have brought you any value at all, go ahead and hit the like button. It's something that's free that you can do to help show your support, and I appreciate all of your guys' comments. So with all that being said, thank you guys again so much, and I can't wait to see you guys again soon. Coming up on episode 9 of making a protogen from scratch, tonight we watch as I struggle to open a can, I light a fire in an attempt to speed things up, and we find a new way to break the sewing machine. Oh, that's not a good sound. Hi, my name is Waffles, and on the previous episode, you watched a middle-aged man put together the world's most complicated craft set. All of this was done on the promise of creating a cybernetic suit of armor for our protogen. Now tonight, we're stuck with a new problem. How exactly do you put everything together? In this episode, we need to fix the batteries, finish all the details, and give everything a nice new coat of paint. Now that sounds like a lot of work, but don't worry, I have a plan. As you might have guessed, the first step in this plan is putting a mighty big hole in the back of our chest armor. From day one, I've always wanted to build the best protogen that I can, even if that means over-engineering everything. If you've never worn a fursuit, they feel like wearing your heaviest winter jacket during an exam you forgot to study for. One of the biggest problems from the start has always been heat management. By adding a vent to the back of the armor, we can create a space for all the hot air to escape to. Once the screen covering is in place, a liberal bead of hot glue is added to help stop everything from moving around. Now that we have our hole situated, we can go ahead and add our secret weapon. I picked up 2 small PC blower fans to attach to the inside of our vest. This should move hot air from inside the costume and then push it out the bottom. Assembling the circuits is easy as the fans are already designed to run on the same voltage as USB. Now, I'm sure there's a better way to wire all this together, but I am no electric wizard. Once everything is properly tested, I glue the fans down to the inside of the vest. Next, I cut the wires down to length and then strip the ends, exposing the metal inside. Afterwards, I solder the wires together, making sure to create a strong connection. Following this, shrink wrap is slid over the metal and then heated to lock in place. The last thing they do is glue a screen on top of the fan to prevent anything from falling in and destroying their tiny plastic blades. Feast your eyes on this, a modern day wonder created only out of discount foam and too much hot glue. This funky looking part is going to act as the frame for our backpack where I'll hide all of the messy wiring. Learning to wire has been one of the most fun skills I've learned during this project. I designed this backpack to look like an old hard drive because I think it fits the cybernetic theme of the suit. This backpack solves one of the most annoying problems from the last episode of always having to carry around the batteries in my hand. Now that the frame is secured in place, I add a carpet of Velcro to the inside to help finish things off. One of the reasons why I went with Velcro on the inside is because I'm not totally sure what our battery requirements are yet. I've just been kind of making it up as I go along, hoping it's all going to work out, and so far it's been going great. So making everything Velcro will keep us nice and flexible as things inevitably change. Now, in order to finish our protogen chest armor, we need to go ahead and create a lid for a box. Right now it's just an open container, so we'll just need to modify a few pieces of foam, and then we can go ahead and finish this section of the project. In order to solve this new problem, I've gone ahead and cut a large sheet of foam that'll act as a cover to our backpack. Next, using pins, I lock everything in place, and this will make it easier to work on and double check the fit. Now, in order to stop our backpack from looking like a flat pancake, I want to add some detail to the top of the lid. Remember, costumes are built in layers, and by adding more, you can create depth in your art. Now, I don't know about you, but that's a good looking piece of foam. I'm really happy with the extra piece we added because I think it really does add more or like kind of depth to our final looking backpack. The next thing that we need to do is get everything painted so it matches the rest of our armor. Now, if you want to paint EVA foam, there are basically 3 steps: heat, primer, and paint. The first step, and something you absolutely cannot skip, is blasting the surface with a heat gun. This melts the foam, creating a flat surface for your paint to stick to. If you skip this step, your foam will act as a giant sponge, sucking up all of your paint. Next is primer. This creates a surface foundation and gets everything prepared for color. Once the primer is dry, I give everything a quick sanding to smooth it out. Finally, I add the color by working slowly and using light coats of paint. If you ask me, the black paint really helps give it that spacey feel. This also gives us another opportunity to check and see how everything fits together. Having a lid is one thing, but now we need to find a way to attach it to the backpack. One of my favorite parts about making stuff is seeing 2 pieces you've sunk a lot of time into come together as one uniform piece. It's just so satisfying seeing everything come together. I'd also like to take a second to appreciate Velcro, as it's been the solution to so many different problems this episode. I end up using a lot less Velcro than expected, as even just a small amount is quite strong. Now that the backpack is finished, I can go ahead and try it on for a quick test fit. While the fursuit is on, I go ahead and take the opportunity to mark out where the shoulder pieces are going to go. Eventually, these will have LEDs in them with little screens covering them, but for now, we just need to figure out where they're going to attach to the bodysuit. Before the shoulder panels can be sent to paint, first all the large cracks need to be filled. I found that wood putty works surprisingly well, as once it dries, you can easily sand it flush. Once again, we find ourselves sanding in the dark, but this time for a good reason. In the last episode, we created the leg armor for protogen, and it too has gotten a heavy coating of filler. There's something oddly zen about standing by yourself in the middle of the night, basking in the glory that is silently grinding away at your personal projects. Throughout this project, I've used Rust-Oleum brand primer and Molotov paint. I've been very happy with the quality of both of them, even if they tend to run out a lot faster than you expect. Now, the only thing left is a montage of painting before we can complete our armor. I ended up running out of paint early, so the final paint job looks a little patchy and unfinished. Off camera, I ended up giving everything a heavy second coat to help really bring out the color in the paint. Overall, I think the paint makes everything look a lot better and helps bring some unity to all of our pieces. No longer is it a random collection of foam, and now it's truly starting to look like something. One of the remaining lingering questions that we have is figuring out what's the best method for attaching the shoulder armor to the fursuit. Overall, I'm really happy with how these shoulder pieces turned out. I'd figured that attaching them to the bodysuit would be really difficult, and it wasn't that bad. Using the Velcro and sewing it to the bodysuit makes for a really strong connection, and I don't think those are going to go anywhere. Ooh, one more thing, now that we have our bodysuit, I want to see how this thing looks together. So let's take the bodysuit we just finished, the suit of armor we created earlier, and the head, which is hiding over here, and put it all together. So now that we have the bodysuit on, I think the smart plan is to go ahead and get everything turned on and hooked up. Once you have that done, then we can worry about actually putting it all on. When I designed this originally, the plan was to feed all of the wires down to the top and then into the batteries. Now, in theory, I don't know how well it's going to work out, especially with this big long cable, so I say we just send it and find out. Now that I have the head on, I will point out something that isn't very good, and that's this cable. It definitely feels like it's getting ready to get caught on something, so I am going to try to be mindful of that. Now, we have one last piece to put on for right now. Building this protogen has been one of the most fun projects I've ever worked on, and one hell of a challenge. But it's not all bad news. Along the way, I've learned a ton of new skills. And I have a trade to make with you. If you've learned anything from watching this channel, even just a little bit, I ask that you please like the video. I think that's a fair trade. You learn something, get a new skill, or learn a little bit about fursuit making, and you help support this channel by growing it. Now, let's talk about what we have to do in the next episode. The number one thing from preventing us from finishing our fursuit is going to be all of the wiring on the panels on the bodysuit. So we need to find a way to hook up the LED screens, get the wiring done, do some soldering, and even, dare I say, a little bit of programming. Once we get that done, there's really not a lot left. A bunch of smaller tasks just to clean things up, but the main focus after that is basically just going to be putting it all together. But we're getting surprisingly close to actually finishing our protogen. And I'm excited too. I can't wait to see this thing finished. So that means the next couple of episodes are going to be even more exciting. So make sure you subscribe. So with all that being said, thank you, hasta pronto, and until next time. How hard is it to build a protogen? I'm talking about a full cybernetic costume if you've never made one before. Hi, I'm Waffles, and about a year ago, I decided to embark on a journey to build my own. In the beginning, I was fueled by enthusiasm, so I didn't want to build just any protogen, I wanted to build the best that the world has ever seen. But there was a slight problem. I kinda overestimated my skill level and underestimated just how hard this problem is gonna be. In the past, I've used my studio to create some basic fursuits, but I've never worked with electronics before. And besides, it's just adding some LEDs to a discount costume. How hard could it be? So, with blind confidence, I figured that the best place to start would be by creating the head. On the quest to make a protogen, creating the head is the first boss that I ran into. I started out by buying a Kyborg head kit, as this gave me a basic starting point to work from. The 3D printed head and tinted visor are arguably the two hardest parts to obtain, and they act kind of as the soul of the fursuit. Protogens might look like a complex creature, but you can really break them down into a few raw materials. The total cost for this entire project was about $1,500, with the head base being the single most expensive item at $400. Now, that amount includes things like tools, electronics, and raw materials, so it's more of a hazy estimation as opposed to an exact number. Have you ever had one of those jobs where they don't really teach you all that much and just kind of throw you out there to see how you do? That's what building this protogen felt like. I was constantly having to learn new skills, and it definitely felt like this protogen threw me out in the deep end. Soldering was my first real test, as it was a requirement for just about everything I was planning on making. The first soldering on the protogen was attaching the headers to the computer powering this entire costume. It was definitely a sink or swim moment, as just one wrong move with a hot soldering iron could cause the death of my tiny computer. It took a few attempts, but in the end I was finally able to get it working, making this feel like a true level up moment of my skill. One of the advantages I had going into this project was some basic experience making fursuits. This allowed me to knock out the bodysuit in a relatively short amount of time. Next, it was creating the paws that would cover my hands and feet. I had a lot of fun making the feet paws for this protogen, as they are delightfully over-engineered. They feature plush claws, individual toes, and custom-made sandals. It's massive overkill for this project, but in the past I considered making paws one of my weaker skills, so I wanted to challenge myself and build a really nice set for this protogen. Next was making the tail, and man, that felt like a walk in the park compared to the challenges before it. Little did I know this would be the last easy thing I was going to be working on for quite a while. The single hardest thing about this entire project was making the armor. I used Mugiwara's protogen armor template as a guide, albeit with some slight modifications. One of the reasons why making armor is so hard is that EVA foam is kind of a real pain to work with. Bending it first requires that you blast it with a heat gun. It often comes unstuck after gluing, and it's a challenging, to say the least, to paint. The first version I made fell apart almost instantly and used up a stack of expensive foam. The second version, is what you see here, is an improvement but still far from ideal. Knowing what I know now, I could almost certainly make a better third version, but perfect is the enemy of getting stuff done, and sometimes you just gotta move on. With the armor close to being finished, there's only a few things left before I can tackle the final boss and putting it all together. The first step was getting everything cleaned up and ready for paint. This required heating the surface, priming, and then finally painting to get a final result strong enough to hold up to the battle of fursuiting. The next loose end to tie up was finishing all the electronics that were going to go inside the armor. This first required running LEDs on the inside of the armor and then running all the wires to the backpack. These were all fed into a series of batteries that were attached to the inside of the armor. Finally, some custom connectors were added, and then plastic screens to cover it all completes the armor and adds the last final touches. The final boss of this entire project is putting the protogen together. This puzzle of taking all these individual parts created over many long nights of work and combining them into something whole. After over a year of hard work, I accomplished my goal of building a protogen, and not only that, building the best protogen that I could. This only left one question. Is it possible for someone who's never made a protogen before to make a truly great protogen? I say yes. With hard work, a willingness to learn, and a little perseverance, it is possible. After finishing the protogen, I decided to take it to Furry Fiesta and give it its first trial by fire. Limited bag space necessitated that I cut it in half and instead only bring it to the con as a partial fursuit. There, I was able to meet up a ton of digital dragon enthusiasts and take some cool photos too. Furry cons are a crazy space, and it's wild seeing so many different costumes walk around in one place. During the con, the protogen faced only one major issue of inconsistent power. Low power was causing all the fans to simultaneously turn off, and that made the head quickly turn into an oven. Also, during the flight home, the protogen faced a few small major issues. Bad packing had caused some damage. Luckily though, it was all relatively easy to fix. With the con over and the Fursuit mostly put it back together, here are some of the quirks and features about owning a protogen. It's very large. Even for Fursuit standards, it's quite big. This makes things like transportation a challenge, but on the flip side, it's also what gives it so much personality. It's complex. Just putting it on requires snapping 7 buckles, plugging in 5 cables, and attaching 4 pieces of Velcro. It basically requires a manual to use. On the flip side though, one of the best things about this entire Fursuit are all the fans. When running, they blast cold air into your face, and heat definitely is an issue while fursuiting around a convention. Speaking of next projects, if you want to learn what I'm going to build next, make sure you hit that subscribe button. I felt so much joy telling the story about how I built this protogen, and by you hitting the like button, you help share that story with the world. It was a blast meeting everyone at TFF, and I love seeing all the different things you guys create. If you're interested in building your own Fursuit, check out the Telegram and Discord group below. They have a great community, and it's my go-to place for asking a Fursuit-related question. Now, I know what you're thinking. Now that the protogen is finished, what am I going to do with it next? The most honest answer is, probably sell it. It currently takes up a lot of space, and I've been kind of itching on building something new. This project really got out of hand, but I'm quite happy with how it turned out in the end. It's not perfect, but it shows that sticking with the process really works. This protogen could theoretically have been built by anyone as long as they stuck with it and, arguably, believed in themselves a little bit. I hope you found this project cool, and I'm excited to do more things like it in the future. So, with all that being said, hasta pronto, and I can't wait to see y'all again soon.